The story of Rama Duwaji begins far from the flashing cameras of New York City. It begins under the quiet desert sun of the Middle East, in a world where identity, heritage, and belonging often blur together. Born in Houston, Texas, to Syrian immigrant parents, Rama grew up between continents. Her childhood unfolded in fragments. Summers in the United States, school years in Dubai, visits to relatives in Damascus before the war reshaped everything. These early movements didn't just define her geography. They carved her sensibility as an artist, someone constantly observing, translating and rebuilding a sense of home through color and clay. Her parents, both first-generation Syrians, carried the nostalgia of a country they left behind. They spoke Arabic at home, told stories of Aleppo's old city, of jasmine-lined courtyards of families scattered by conflict. For Rama, those stories were more than bedtime tales. They were blueprints of identity. She would later say that her art was the only language where I didn't have to choose between East and West. In her drawings, minarets rose beside Houston skylines. Women in hijabs danced with the confidence of New York club girls. Even before she knew it, her art was political, not by design, but by birth. After high school in Dubai, Rama moved back to the US to study communication design at Virginia Commonwealth University, a campus known for blending art with activism. There she found her voice. Her professors remember her as quiet but intense, the student who could sit for hours sketching intricate female portraits layered with Arabic calligraphy. She wasn't interested in pretty pictures. She wanted to tell stories of women like her mother, her aunts, her friends, women who loved their culture but felt trapped by its expectations. Her senior thesis project, I Am Not Your Oppression, became a small viral moment online in the Arab art community. It reimagined traditional Middle Eastern iconography through a feminist lens, bold, unapologetic, and deeply emotional. When she graduated, Rama stayed restless. She freelanced as an illustrator for a while, working with outlets like the Washington Post and the New Yorker, but she wanted more than digital commissions. She wanted texture. That's when she turned to ceramics, a medium her grandmother had loved. Clay, she said, felt like storytelling you could hold in your hands. Her pieces began traveling, from small exhibitions in Virginia to collective shows in Beirut and London. Her style was unmistakable. Surreal figures with Arab features, often surrounded by desert flora, holding symbols of resistance, olive branches, doves, burning books. Every object was a conversation between displacement and defiance. But for all her international reach, Rama stayed grounded in intimacy. She lived simply, a rented studio apartment, hand-painted mugs, Arabic music on low volume while she worked. On her social media pages, she often shared glimpses of process rather than polish, photos of her hands stained with glaze, captions about anxiety, or snippets of poetry from Nizar Qabbani and Mahmoud Darwish. She cultivated a modest following, mostly other diasporic artists who found in her honesty a mirror of their own fractured belonging. By 2020, as political tensions flared globally and Islamophobia re-entered mainstream politics, Rama's art took on new urgency. Her illustration, A Home Without Borders, showing a child weaving together an American flag and a Syrian keffiyeh, was featured in a BBC special on immigrant artists redefining nationalism. Commissions poured in. Apple used one of her animations in a campaign celebrating Arab-American Heritage Month. Her name started circulating beyond art circles, among curators, activists, even journalists who saw in her work a soft-spoken rebellion. Yet fame never quite seduced her. She continued to resist the label of political artist. When asked about it in an interview, she replied, "I don't make art to make statements. I make art because silence feels heavier." That sentence, in many ways, explains everything that followed: her choice of partners, her eventual plunge into public life, and the way she would later navigate being married to one of America's most talked-about politicians. It was around 2021, after moving to New York City, that her story began to intersect with Zohran Mamdani's. At the time, he was already known in local circles, a young Democratic Socialist assemblyman from Queens, son of Ugandan Indian immigrants, and a vocal advocate for affordable housing and immigrant rights. Rama had no interest in politics, or so she thought. She was more comfortable at gallery openings than rallies. But fate and a dating app had other plans. They met on Hinge, of all places. His profile mentioned organizing tenants and drinking too much chai. Hers said simply, artist seeking curiosity. In their first conversation, they discovered they had both been raised between worlds. She in the Arab diaspora, he in the Indian-African one. Both children of immigrants who built new lives from scratch. Both shaped by political consciousness from a young age, not through textbooks, but through family survival. Their first date was supposed to be a quick coffee. It lasted 5 hours. They talked about everything: art, socialism, faith, exile, the meaning of home. She teased him for his campaign photos. You look like you're auditioning for a protest poster. And he laughed that he'd never dated someone who understood why he quoted Faiz Ahmed Faiz in speeches. By the end of the night, they were walking through Astoria Park, watching the lights on the East River, both a little startled by how natural it felt. Rama would later tell a friend, it wasn't love at first sight, it was recognition. The recognition of someone who spoke the same emotional language, even if in different alphabets. As their relationship grew, she found herself drawn into his world. Community meetings, campaign events, volunteer circles. At first she was quiet, observing. Then slowly she began contributing, designing posters, advising on visual narratives. Her art gave his activism a different texture. His politics gave her art a sharper purpose. They became a reflection of each other's ideals. He, the activist who believed change came through policy. She, the artist who believed it, began with empathy. Still, she guarded her privacy fiercely. While Zohran's name appeared in news headlines, Rama's stayed mostly in artist credits. When people asked why she didn't appear more often by his side, she said, because the work isn't about being seen, it's about seeing. Those who knew them say their connection was built on quiet understanding, not spectacle. When the world later scrutinized their every move, their marriage, her outfits, their faith, those early years of intimacy became their foundation. Before she was a political spouse or a first lady in waiting, Rama Duwaji was simply an artist, trying to find a home in a world that often told her she didn't belong anywhere. The irony, of course, is that in trying to create belonging through her art, she ended up helping another person build it through politics. 2 lives, 2 mediums, 1 mission, to make New York and maybe the world a little more human. When Rama Duwaji moved to New York City in 2021, she wasn't looking for love. She was chasing space. Space to create, to exist outside the labels of Syrian, Arab, immigrant, or Muslim woman artist. New York, with its chaos and contradictions, felt like a city that didn't ask for definitions. She rented a small apartment in Brooklyn, converted the living room into an art studio, and started teaching part-time while freelancing for magazines. Her art, often filled with the scent of displacement and longing, mirrored the life she was living, surrounded by noise, yet deeply introspective. At the same time, across the East River, Zohran Mamdani was beginning to attract national attention. The young democratic socialist from Queens had just made headlines for championing tenants' rights, free public transit, and affordable housing. He wasn't just another politician. He was something rarer, a storyteller in the language of policy. His speeches were poetic, his activism relentless, and his sincerity disarming. To many, he was the future of progressive politics. But privately, he was still just a man balancing purpose and fatigue, often scrolling through his phone late at night, between rallies and legislative sessions. It was during one of those long, sleepless nights that he came across a Hinge profile that caught his attention. A photo of a woman, her dark curls loosely tied, paint-stained fingers holding a cup of Turkish coffee. The bio read, artist, nomad, trying to unlearn silence. He laughed softly. It was cryptic, maybe even pretentious, but something about it felt genuine. Her name, Rama. He sent a message. If unlearning silence is a skill, I could use a teacher. She replied the next morning. Lesson 1, listen more than you speak. From that first exchange, their conversations unfolded like long, handwritten letters. They talked about music, politics, art, and the strange ache of belonging to too many places at once. He told her about his Ugandan Indian parents, how they fled Idi Amin's dictatorship and rebuilt their lives in New York. She shared stories about growing up between Texas and Dubai, always feeling too foreign for one, too Western for the other. Their first date happened at a small Ethiopian cafe in Queens. He arrived early, nervous, rehearsing what to say. She arrived late, unapologetic, carrying a sketchbook. They ordered injera and tea, and within minutes the conversation flowed effortlessly. They spoke about poetry. She quoted Mahmoud Darwish, he countered with Faiz Ahmed Faiz. When she told him she made art about women reclaiming identity, he leaned forward, fascinated. "So you're doing with images what I'm trying to do with policy," he said. Later that night, as they walked along the waterfront, he admitted something quietly. "In politics, I talk all day about liberation, but I rarely meet people who live it." She smiled, half shy, half defiant. "Artists have been practicing liberation since the first story was painted on a wall." That line would become one of his favorite quotes. Over the next months, their worlds began to merge. She started attending his events, not as a political partner but as an observer. She sat quietly at the back of community halls, sketching moments. An elderly tenant gripping his eviction notice, a child tugging at her mother's sleeve during a housing rally. Those drawings later became part of a small series she called The City That Speaks Back. When Zohran saw them, he was moved. "You caught what my speeches can't," he told her. They were opposites in rhythm but mirrors in purpose. He was structured, analytical, and idealistic. She was intuitive, emotional, and grounded. He saw the world as a system to fix. She saw it as a wound to heal. Together they began shaping a philosophy that fused both activism with tenderness, art with accountability. Their relationship deepened through small gestures rather than grand moments. He'd show up at her studio after long legislative sessions, exhausted, watching her work with clay until his pulse slowed down. She'd bring him lentil soup during campaign nights and remind him to rest. They read to each other. Bell Hooks, Edward Said, Arundhati Roy. They debated capitalism over midnight falafel wraps and argued passionately about strategy versus symbolism. And yet no argument ever felt final. It always ended in laughter, in understanding, in the quiet recognition that they were building something bigger than romance. In 2023, when Zohran faced his toughest re-election campaign, targeted by powerful real estate lobbies, Rama stood by him, not in front of cameras, but in the background where it mattered. She designed his volunteer posters, created digital art for his social pages, and even animated a short clip explaining his Free Buses initiative, which went viral among younger voters. Yet when reporters asked her for interviews, she declined every time. "He's the story," she would say simply, but privately he insisted otherwise. "You are the proof that empathy works," he told her one evening. It was during this period of chaos that their bond crystallized. In late 2024, after his successful re-election, Zohran proposed in the most ordinary, unplanned way imaginable, over dinner at home. They were eating leftover pasta, and he said, "If we can survive a campaign together, we can survive anything." She laughed, thinking he was joking, until he pulled out a small silver ring, not from a jewelry store, but made by a Syrian craftsman she'd once introduced him to. The proposal wasn't glamorous, but it was exactly who they were. Intentional, simple, real. They married quietly a few months later in early 2025. The ceremony was small and intimate, held in Dubai, away from the political spotlight. Only close friends and family attended. Photos later leaked. Rama in a minimalist cream gown embroidered with subtle Palestinian tatris patterns, Zohran in a traditional kurta instead of a tuxedo. They looked radiant, but also private. A couple who had built their intimacy in the shadows of public life and wanted to keep it there, at least a little longer. After the wedding, they returned to New York to a changed world. His name was now frequently in headlines, the socialist lawmaker shaking up New York politics. As his profile grew, so did curiosity about her. Who was this mysterious wife? The artist who rarely appeared in interviews, who avoided public comment even as her husband became one of the most talked-about politicians in America. When asked about her absence from television or campaign appearances, Rama explained in a rare comment, "Visibility is not the same as impact. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone you love is not stand beside them, but stand behind them." It was a statement that summed up her philosophy. quiet strength. Deliberate distance, unwavering conviction. To outsiders, their relationship seemed improbable, a firebrand politician and a reclusive artist. But to those who knew them, it made perfect sense. They were both products of displacement, both fluent in the language of struggle, and both believers in a world remade through compassion. Every relationship has a heartbeat. Theirs was built on purpose. When Zohran Mamdani won the Democratic primary for New York City mayor in June 2025, the victory sent shockwaves far beyond the 5 boroughs. To his supporters, it felt like history bending. A Muslim, Indian, Ugandan, American democratic socialist defeating one of the most powerful political dynasties in the city. To his critics, it felt like a warning of how far the progressive left had come. But in the quiet apartment they shared in Astoria, there were no champagne flutes or confetti that night. After the cameras left, after the speeches ended, Rama Duwaji and Zohran sat together on the couch, shoeless and exhausted. The weight of what had just happened slowly settling in. She reached over and rested her head on his shoulder. "Are you ready for what comes next?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "I don't think anyone ever really is." That single exchange, at intimate, unguarded, captured the new chapter they were about to enter. Because for all the speeches, ideals, and policies, being mayor-elect meant stepping into a spotlight that burned hotter than any campaign trail. Within 24 hours of his victory, their names were everywhere. Cable news shows dissected his policies, financial analysts speculated on his economic plans, and social media feeds filled with both celebration and hate. Hashtags like Mayor Mamdani trended alongside Stop the Socialist, First Muslim Mayor, and even Hindu-phobic Mamdani, a smear pushed by opponents after a misrepresented old speech surfaced online. For Rama, the sudden glare felt surreal. Just months earlier, her biggest audience had been art school students and quiet galleries. Now tabloids were pulling photos from her Instagram, analyzing her clothing, and writing think pieces about what kind of first lady she would be. The New York Post ran a headline, "Who is Rama Duwaji?" the artist behind the socialist mayor, describing her as mysterious, striking, and possibly influential. The tone was half admiration, half suspicion. In contrast, Elle magazine and People published glowing profiles of her art and background, painting her as a modern muse at the intersection of culture and conscience. They showcased her ceramics, her Syrian-American roots, and her ability to embody quiet strength. But attention is rarely kind for long. Within days, conservative pundits seized on her past works, especially pieces that expressed solidarity with Palestine, to paint her as controversial or radical. One talk show host even held up an image from her 2020 exhibition, calling it anti-Western propaganda. Rama stayed silent. She didn't issue a press statement, didn't post a defense. When asked why, she simply told a friend, "Art doesn't owe an explanation to noise." That restraint became her signature and her shield. As Zohran's transition team took shape, journalists clamored for any sign of Rama's public role. Would she lead cultural initiatives? Would she redesign the mayor's residence? Would she use her platform for Middle Eastern causes? Behind closed doors, she was quietly helping shape the aesthetic of her husband's new political era. She advised on campaign branding for the transition office, urging his team to use more inclusive imagery. Murals, subway workers, street vendors, nurses. She wanted politics to look like the people it served. Her influence wasn't loud, but it was everywhere. When Zohran gave his first post-victory speech, the background art on stage, a mosaic of 500 photos of New Yorkers printed on recycled posters, was her idea. And yet, she remained publicly invisible. No joint TV interviews, no morning talk shows. When asked about it, she told a journalist privately, "You can't build a people's movement and make it about two people's marriage." Still, symbolism had its own power. During his victory night celebration, she appeared briefly beside him, wearing a cream blouse embroidered with Palestinian tatrees, a traditional motif of resistance. Photos of her went viral within hours. To some, it was a simple cultural nod. To others, a bold political statement. Either way, she became a visual icon of a moment that blended art, politics, and identity in a way New York had rarely seen before. As the noise around them grew, The couple began navigating the tension between personal intimacy and public responsibility. Their evenings, once filled with poetry readings and laughter, were now consumed by briefings and security protocols. Armed guards stood outside their home. Friends joked that they could no longer drop by without an appointment. Rama adapted the only way she knew how, through creation. She transformed a section of Gracie Mansion's old art room, where they would soon move, into a ceramic studio. Clay, she said, was the one thing that didn't care about polls or headlines. It listens, she told Zohran one night, even when no one else does. He envied her peace, but also drew strength from it. When opposition ads accused him of being too radical, or hate groups flooded his mentions, Rama's quiet steadiness became his compass. During one particularly brutal news cycle, when a doctored video falsely claimed he had called for abolishing private property, she simply texted him a Darwish quote, "We have on this earth what makes life worth living." He later admitted that was the moment he stopped reacting out of anger and started leading from purpose again. Their marriage became, in many ways, a partnership of endurance. She shielded his spirit. He amplified her message. When he launched the Free Transit for All initiative, she created minimalist art posters featuring subway riders and the slogan, "The city moves when everyone can." They appeared across social media and bus stops, no name attached. But insiders knew whose hand was behind them. By autumn 2025, Zohran's administration was being called a cultural experiment as much as a political one. Underneath the policy headlines, rent freezes, small business grants, and citywide transit reforms, the city was witnessing something deeper, the aesthetic of governance changing. Rama's subtle influence could be seen in the city's public art campaigns, in murals featuring multilingual slogans of solidarity, and in the revival of immigrant artist grants. She insisted that politics should look and sound like the people it represents. Still, controversy lingered. Conservative media continued to dig into her past statements, accusing her of anti-capitalist sympathies. Some tabloids labeled her the socialist's muse, but among young artists and activists, she was a quiet hero, proof that you could stand beside power without surrendering your authenticity. One viral tweet summed up the sentiment best. Rama Duwaji doesn't need to speak loudly. Her silence has more substance than most politicians' speeches. By November 2025, as Inauguration Day approached, the couple had begun to settle into a rhythm, part routine, part survival. Early mornings for briefings, late nights for art. On Sundays, they cooked together, often Syrian food, lentil soup, makluba, and katayef pancakes. He said those meals reminded him why he was fighting, to make the city kinder, more nourishing. Sometimes, when the noise became too much, they'd retreat to the roof of their building, watching the skyline glow. She'd point to the endless windows and whisper, "All those stories waiting to be seen." He'd nod, reminded that leadership wasn't about speeches, it was about listening. In the rare interviews Zohran gave about his marriage, he never used grand phrases. He said simply, "Rama keeps me human." Their story, an artist and a politician, a dreamer and a reformer, had become more than a love story. It was a case study in what modern partnership could look like. Two people using different tools to build the same kind of world. She used clay, color, and silence. He used words, laws, and votes. Both believed in liberation, but each expressed it in their own dialect. In an age where politics often rewards ego, the Mamdani-Duwaji relationship offered something rare, humility. Neither tried to outshine the other. Instead, their connection reminded the world that progress isn't only built in city halls or campaigns, it's also built in kitchens, in quiet conversations, in the shared decision to keep believing in better days. As Inauguration Day loomed, a journalist asked Rama if she was nervous to become New York's First Lady. She smiled and said, "Titles come and go, but love is the real work of public service." It was the perfect answer, one that revealed the truth behind every headline, every controversy, every viral photo. This was never just a political story. It was a love story, one written in courage, culture, and clay.